All right, I got Dr. Nicole Cain on the show today. She is many things: naturopathic doctor, clinical in psychotherapy, right? Training in MDMR, EMDR, which I really want to ask you about because I've heard really good things about that. Um, Author of the book Panic Proof and the leading expert in trauma informed and integrative approaches for mental and emotional wellness. Dr. Cain, welcome to the show.
I'm so happy to be here, Joel. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, talk to us. How did you specialize in panic attacks? Because that's something that we know is on the rise. Anxiety, we hear it all. These are the words I hear a lot from clients or just how are your kids in daily conversations. It's like the word anxiety is coming up more and more. Or I had a panic attack. It seems like it's more part of the vernacular than it ever was before, right? So how did you start specializing in this realm specifically?
There's so much despair around panic and anxiety in the medical profession. If you Google and you look at HealthNet and MD Consult and all these other resources that are generally considered pretty reputable, and you do a search for anxiety, they'll often write that anxiety is a part of the human experience and we just have to live with it. And my mission as a wounded healer myself, as an academic, as a researcher, and as a clinician, I set out to prove that wrong because it didn't make sense that symptoms of suffering are just something we have to endure, that we have to live with. That felt so antithetical to the belief that the body is intelligently, wisely, and beautifully designed to heal itself. And we see this evidenced in our world. You fall, you scrape your knee, your kids get a bump on their head, you have a procedure done. By and large, the body heals that. And so, why wouldn't we heal our emotions? Why wouldn't we heal anxiety? That didn't make any sense to me. And so, that's how the journey began. And I think that the book Panic Proof really creates a pretty compelling case for anxiety is something that we can truly heal from, that anxiety isn't the problem, that anxiety is our body's attempt at a solution to a problem, and to open the doors for better conversation about what anxiety is, what it isn't, what panic is, what it isn't, and what to do about it. So that's kind of like the overarching mission of my work, is to prove wrong what we've been told. So I want to pause there and see kind of how that landed. So a lot of
Yeah,
people are like, what?
yeah, I love that. Well, it's so interesting. Usually, we as coaches and therapists, I always feel like we're working on us, and when we figure it out, we're like, wait a second, I got. It's so interesting that you said, I'm recovering anxiety. So it's
Yeah.
like when we figure out these things, it's our own pain to purpose that leads us to what if I could help other people. So I love that. But something you said too is that a panic attack, it's just a signal. It's not the actual disease, right? And I
Yeah.
think when we get labeled by doctors, like you have this, we take on that identity of like, oh, this is just who I am.
Yeah.
But it's almost like it's just a check engine light, is what you're saying. It's like,
Yeah.
hey, maybe you just need a tune up. Get your
Yeah.
oil changed and let's figure out what's going on, then get your car back on the road. So how can listeners learn, I guess, to interpret or use this body alarm system as a mechanism to just say, hey, this is a time to check in, and now how do we heal from that, right?
Yeah. I love that question of how can we use this alarm system to check in and heal. And before I answer that, there's a story that's coming to mind, and I feel like I have to tell you this story. Is that okay?
Please, because I think, we all learn from stories more than just facts. Although I do love the facts and the studies,
Yeah.
we're by human nature, that's how we used to pass stories along was through story and telling, and that's kind of been lost. But yet,
Yeah.
how do we remember things? It's always through story. So yeah, please.
Yeah, this is a story that was kind of an aha moment for me that I feel like is a volley up into, well, then what do we do next about this? And so I was in medical school And my teacher, he's a mentor, he came into clinic one day and he's like, all right, I need to share with you something. And he tells us this story about when he was in practice and two women came around the same time, unrelated to each other, came into his office for medical care. And they both were diagnosed with lupus. And this is an autoimmune condition primarily seen in women, can affect both genders, but primarily seen in women. And it can have pretty severe symptoms that can affect us head to toe. So these two women came in unrelated to each other, same diagnosis, interestingly similar symptom profile. And so he's thinking to himself, well, this will be a neat way to sort of assess my treatments and how effective they are. So he takes their cases, he prescribes treatments, and he's following up with them. And the first woman is getting so much better. Her autoimmune markers are going down, her symptoms are going down, her lived experience is improving. She is, for all intents and purposes, gaining greater health, right? And the second woman comes in and she's not improving. She's not getting better. Her tests aren't improving. And he's scratching his head. He's like, why isn't she getting better? What am I missing? There's got to be something missing. He's looking at the symptoms. He's looking at the data. He's really trying to figure it out. He can't for the life of him figure it out until one day she was his last client. And as he finished up, he walked her to the door. He stood at the door getting ready to lock it up and watched her walk to her car. And she got in the car and she backed out of the parking space. And what did he see? On her license plate, it read, "Lupus, me."
Wow.
Which, for me, you reacted very similar to how I did. That it's this moment where, as I tell this story, I get goosebumps on my body and I think about the power of identifying as our diagnosis, the power of the nocebo. And the nocebo is like the placebo. The placebo is we take something, a treatment, a pill, and believe it's going to help us, and then it does. The nocebo is the opposite, believing that we can't get well, that something won't work, right? And so when we look at the narrative of anxiety in healthcare, when we look at the treatment goals, we are by and large victims of a nocebo. When we look at anxiety as the problem, and when we suppress the indicator of a problem and we don't obtain greater health, and the outcome then reinforces that belief that our anxiety is a problem, that we're broken, right? So when it comes to healing, truly healing from anything, lupus, panic, anxiety, the first thing we want to do is to look at our sense of ownership, identity, and personal agency. So we start with a new definition of anxiety. With anxiety, we have a fear response. Our bodies are designed to have a fear response. Our ancestors, who were able to effectively get afraid when a tiger was growling in the woods, were those that were able to fight the tiger or run for safety. They were the ones that survived and then had descendants, right? Those who couldn't have a fear response may be less likely to pass on those genes, right? Fear is life-saving. Fear is important. Fear is when we have this arousal, this activation that looks like fight, flight, freeze, flop, fawn, fracture, right? And that it saves us. Anxiety is where we have that response, but it's out of the context of actual danger, right? It's when you're driving to work or when your kids go away to their first day of kindergarten. It's when you get an email from your boss that says you screwed something up or you miss an appointment or your spouse says that one thing that just sends you out, right? That feeling of autonomic arousal out of the context of true danger and combined with that nocebo, that sense of powerlessness, that's anxiety. And when we start looking at it from an evolutionary perspective, from a biological perspective, and from a personal power perspective, then the conversation about what we do about it suddenly changes.
So good. Okay, I want to ask you something
Yes.
because have you read the book Bad Therapy?
No, but I'm writing it down right now.
Okay. I never saw the episode, but I believe she's kind of well known, the person who wrote the book, because she was on Joe Rogan's show. So I guess that's what I heard. I heard people refer to that. I was like, oh yeah, I read that book. I had no idea she was, I guess, that well known. So a lot of what the book talks about, and she has a background in psychotherapy as well. And one of the things she said is therapy sometimes can be more dangerous than good, right? Because we talk about the problem so much, or we ask kids at an early age in school, like they're starting to do that now in school, is ask, well, how do you feel, right? And 90% of the time, like nine out of, maybe not, maybe 8 out of 10 times, your brain is like, I'm having a crappy day. Like, because we always focus on the negative, right? We tend to just focus on how do we protect ourselves? How do we stay alive, right? Another day. And so if you ask the average person, let's just say, I'll even go down lower, 7 out of 10 times, it's like probably not good. And so what she was saying in some of the studies is like, you ask a kid enough times, how are they feeling? Well, how do you feel about that? The answer is probably you're eventually going to get a negative response. And then they start to go deeper and dwell into it and become this is a problem. So it's interesting what you're saying. And then I also heard, Gary Vaynerchuk, who's like very well, Gary V, right? Very well known. And he was on a show recently on a podcast, and the host asked him about anxiety. And he said, honestly, I think it's just made up. He said, we've created this word. He's like, this wasn't even like in the English language like 20 years ago, but now it's a thing. And now people identify with it. Is that kind of what you're talking about? Do you think it's like, obviously we know it's a real thing. I'm not diminishing that it's not, because it is a real feeling, but is it just that, is that what you see happening kind of? Is that we're just talking about it so much that it now becomes, again, part of like who we just are?
Yeah, the way we wire it is the way we'll fire it, right? And so what you're pointing out is a really important concept of where we focus our attention, that's what's going to be our reality. And even the art of asking questions can move another person towards more anxiety type symptoms or more of a personal sense of power. And I remember when I was getting my master's level training in clinical psychology, we talked about the importance of the clinical inquiry, where if we ask a person, have you ever been, let's say, assaulted, right? Because we often screen for that. Have you ever been assaulted? Person's like, no, I don't think so. They go to the next doctor. Well, have you ever been assaulted? Well, I don't think so. The next doctor, have you ever been assaulted? They're like, well, maybe. Why do people keep asking me this? Maybe it happened. So here's another story. There's this study that was done, and they had a person who volunteered, and they told the volunteer, we'll say this is Joel. Joel is the volunteer. And so Joel comes, and the researchers are like, bring your 10 best friends. And so he says, okay, so Joel, you bring your 10 best friends, and they send you out of the room, and you're waiting for the researcher to come in and ask you some questions. While you're in that other room, the researcher actually goes to your 10 best friends. And the researcher says, what we want you to do is make up a memory. I want everybody to make up an event that Joel was at. And then when he comes back in this room, I want you guys to talk about it. And so then they go get Joel. They bring him back into the room. And one of his friends is like, do you guys remember when we went on that boating trip? And Joel's like, what boating trip? And the other friend is like, yeah. You were there, Joel, and you actually were the one who was driving the boat, but we hit a bunch of seaweed. And then Susie over here, and then Susie pipes in, oh, yeah, I fell off the boat. And someone else adds to it. And then what we see, Joel after Joel after Joel, is that he will not only start to remember this event, but he'll start to add memories to that event. And this is exactly what you're talking about, is when we even begin the conversation, about anxiety, about our well-being, about our mental health is just the sheer power of how we're thinking about it can make a big difference. And that's, I think, what we're seeing in the literature is all these people on social media are like, I am an ADHD. I am on the spectrum.
Yeah.
I am anxiety. I am bipolar. And then we start noticing, oh, I have a hard time focusing too. Oh, I feel anxious too. And so then we're creating more synaptic plasticity that's around that sense of identity and that wiring. And then we can start to create an experience that may have been different had the framing been different.
Okay, that's and you're right. That's crazy, right? Because
Yeah.
now we've created a story around it. Like you said, neurons that wire together, fire together, and
Yeah.
now it's a thing. But here's the thing I've noticed too is when that thing gets created, whether you believe it or not, or let's say one day I go down, I go, you know what? I actually don't believe in this anxiety thing. But you know what? It's too late. It's already hardwired in me, and I'm feeling it every freaking day. And I'm sure you see people like that. Maybe they can even admit to themselves logically, like, yeah, okay, like it's not real. But at the end of the day, what are they feeling internally? They're still dealing with it. So now what? Now that we've got years of this built up, this either panic attacks or anxiety,
Yeah.
what do we start doing to unravel some of this and rewire? Because some of that is so deeply embedded.
Yeah. I used to have a phobia of flying, like horrible, horrible. I was in a Southwest flight that was coming into Phoenix. You and I were talking about Phoenix before we started recording today. And with all of this heat rising up from the mountains and the air and the cooler air up in the clouds, there could be pockets. And we were flying in, we hit this pocket of air, and the plane jerked really violently to the side. And the person sitting next to me had a meltdown. And ever since then, I had a horrible phobia of flying. I would curl into the fetal position, clutching a Bible and just weeping and rocking. And the flight attendants are like, is she okay? And my husband's like trying to feed me ice. And so this went on for a decade. I'd get on a plane because I had to, kept flying, horrible terror, horrible panic, horrible anxiety, creating all of these stories about if I'm really, really nice to the TSA agent, maybe I'll build karma points to where the divine won't smite me and the plane won't fall out of the sky. All this magical thinking. And as an anxious sufferer, an anxiety sufferer, our world could get smaller and smaller and smaller. And that feeling of powerlessness, feeling of being out of control, we do everything we can to grab onto control, to do anything we can to just make it stop. If I could just breathe without the elephant ripping out my chest, right? Just breathe. So I want to honor the intensity of the suffering. I hear you. And what happens now after doing this work? If I'm on a flight, just flew to Portugal recently, I was on a flight, we're over the ocean, we hit some bumps. And I noticed I was feeling a little bit of that nerve shooting in my teeth. Ooh, feeling a little bit of my body heating up. And so what's the difference? The body's going to talk. It's going to give us information. But the key here is, what do we do with that information? So when I was on that flight to Portugal and we were flying over the clouds and the bumping, and I started noticing my breathing getting a little faster, my heart beating a little harder, I said, oh, my body's getting a little activated right now. I'm not in danger. I'm not at risk. It just feels kind of uncomfortable. And when we have an activation and we have a corrective cognitive experience, and therefore a corrective cognitive biological and emotional response, we start to reprocess that. It's kind of like every time I turn on the light, my eyes get really sensitive. You know, you walk out of the theater and it's a matinee and the eyes are really sensitive. Over time, we'll adapt, right? So now if I get a little stressed, the experience is different. The sensations may be a little goofy, but the experience is different. The sense of power, interpretation, and control is different. And what I do about it is different. Before I might pop a Xanax. Now what I do is different.
Just from that story alone, it sounds like you've started to rewire it so that you're in control
Yeah.
and that it's just a sensation. It's almost like you can look out at third party and be like, hey, like there's me, that's my body. I'm feeling these things and it's okay. I know how to breathe. I know how to do certain things to start to change my nervous system, which by the way, it's something you talk a lot about is that you were talking about it earlier, that nervous system dysregulation, right? And being really at the root cause of chronic anxiety. So what exactly though does that mean? Because if people are like, yeah, I have a dysautonomic nervous system, okay, like great. I mean, they might not even know, right? It's like, well, we're all stressed. I mean, Dr. Cain, like we all have kids, a mortgage, and a job, and all these things, right? We're all stressed. So what makes me any different than the other stressed out person? So I guess how does that nervous system dysregulation contribute to that root cause of anxiety? Where to the point where so many treatments, I'll say treatments in air quotes, miss the mark.
Yeah. So if we're trying to suppress, then our symptoms will get worse. So think of it as what we deny will amplify, what we suppress will express. And people find that this happens all the time. If I try to suppress my anxiety, it's going to come out in other ways. People will use benzodiazepines, but then they'll get rebound anxiety. I had a patient who he took Xanax for fear of flying, and then he's like, wow, I actually feel really calm with this. I'm going to take it for other things. And he never had identified as being an anxious person before regularly taking the Xanax. And then when he was having that interdose withdrawal, the body was compensating and he was getting more anxious. So what we deny will amplify, what we resist will persist. And so if we try to suppress ourselves out of feeling anxious and panicky, it'll just get worse. And one of the most powerful things we can do in the moment is to lean into it, to acknowledge it, and to notice it. Because oftentimes our symptoms will come up in 90-second intervals. So if you're noticing, and here's an exercise that you can do. And so those who are listening, those who are watching, here's an exercise you could do. So I want you to set an alarm for 3 minutes. This is kind of a long time. So if you want to start with 30 seconds, you could do that. But you'll set your alarm for 3 minutes. And you're going to close your eyes. You're going to go somewhere where you're not going to be interrupted by the kids or by a phone or anything like that. And you're going to sit and you're going to notice your body for 3 minutes. But this is the most important part, is that when you notice your body, you practice the art of not doing anything about it. So when I'm on that plane and I notice like, oh my gosh, my body temperature is going up, there's this desire. I want to combat that. I want to suppress it. I want to cool it off. But when we notice our symptoms, when we notice our body and we just allow it to express and then work its way out and go on to the next thing, this teaches us a couple of things. Is one, is the body's going to do what the body's going to do. It's going to have little pains. You're going to feel gurgles in your stomach. You're going to have lots of thoughts. It's just a moment. We breathe, we acknowledge, we notice, that moment will pass. So if you do this exercise, sometimes people will tell me, oh, I feel like an itch on the side of my face. I want to scratch it. Don't scratch it. Just notice it. Notice that itch will actually change. Maybe then you'll notice like, ooh, my neck is a little tight. Kind of feel like stretching it out a little bit, moving my neck. Well, just notice it. That's going to express. That's going to change. So one of the most important first steps is to simply be in that space without a need to do anything about it, which is, I think, a key difference between somebody who's hypervigilant from anxiety and feeling like they have to manage it all the time to somebody who just allows and acknowledges it to be present.
That's incredible. Why do you think that works so well? And here's where I'm kind of thinking, because what you said, we want to control. We always want to control. By doing that for just even 3 minutes, which is nothing.
Yeah.
But I bet after 3 minutes, for a lot of 90% of people, whatever their anxiety or whatever it was that they were going to spiral out starts to just wither away, because nervous system just naturally calms, knowing that there's nothing I can do. I can't control it. I'm just going to kind of, you're like letting it go. It's almost like a surrender process
Yeah.
that's done in like hyperspeed.
Yeah.
Is that why?
Hyperspeed.
Is it starting to teach us like how to like surrender in a little bit and like, and then come back to the present and go, okay, like what can I legitimately like do here now,
Yeah.
given this
Exactly.
information?
Yeah. Instead of reacting and feeling like we have to control, is we're allowing. And we're not becoming a victim to the anxiety. We're saying, okay, I'm just going to notice this for 3 minutes and then we're going to move on. And this gives us the sense of power of right now we're going to work on it. And right now we're going to heal. Right now we're going to do the presence. We're going to do the mindfulness. We're going to do the centering. And then later when I need to be present in a meeting and a sensation comes up, then we can perhaps address it. But we are in control. We are empowered. And power, personal sense of power, is the antidote to anxiety.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a soundbite. Speaking of anxiety,
Yeah.
you actually in your book outline 9 distinct anxiety types.
Yeah.
Now, we were funny because we were talking about like how all these labels, there's labels, you have this type of anxiety, you have this type. But why do you actually think it's important then for folks to know that there are these different subtypes of anxiety? Can that actually help them with determining how they might cope with it? And is it just, does it help them strategically? Like why do that?
Yeah, I think there's two key reasons for that. One is that it helps us understand what we might be experiencing. So a lot of people, especially if you have kids, right? If you have a little baby and that baby is crying and all you know is that that baby is upset, then you don't really know what to do to help the baby feel better. Is the baby hungry? Is the baby hot? Is the baby in pain? You don't know. You can't meet its needs. But if you can understand the type of cry, which a lot of parents describe to me, oh, when I hear this kind of keening, I know they're really, really sad. Or when I hear this pitch, I know that they're in pain. Or I know that this is a dirty diaper, or this is just I'm hungry, right? So the more familiar we are with the unlimited amounts of thoughts, feelings, and sensations that we as human beings living in this body experience, clarity can be quite empowering. So that's the first benefit to it. The second benefit is I think it opens the doors for better research and development into treatments for anxiety as a medical community, because primarily since the 1960s, the mainstay of treatment has been pharmacology and talk therapy. And in 2022, the chemical imbalance theory that said low serotonin equals depression and more serotonin equals not depression, therefore depression's caused by low serotonin, is that theory was completely debunked by a massive meta-analysis of all the research.
Yeah.
It's not true. So then that leaves us as a medical community sitting back and scratching our heads and saying, well, why do we feel depressed or anxious? And why, for some people, do antidepressants help? We get to ask more questions. And so categorizing our anxiety presentations allows us to say, okay, if this group of people, when they get anxious, they get diarrhea or gas or bloating, we can start looking at what that might be caused by, that the body is presenting these Sherlock Holmes-esque clues as to why, what's going on, versus somebody who has chest anxiety. Oftentimes the root causes of that may be a little bit different. Or trauma anxiety, where the main thing of the main thing is I have flashbacks, recurrent thoughts, intrusive memories. Giving me a probiotic for my gut is probably not going to help if it's caused by a major traumatic event. So it allows us to do a better job with precision-based treatments.
That's so cool. It reminds me of like Eastern medicine. Like, if you're an angry person, well, your liver's probably imbalanced, right? Something like, it's almost similar to that, to like what you're talking about. It helps you as a practitioner kind of better triage somebody and saying I might look at this differently. I love that. Talk about, there's obviously a huge difference. There's a gap between anxiety and then a panic attack, right?
Yeah.
It's like, that's like full blown.
Yeah.
So someone might even say, well, yeah, Dr. Cain, that's great advice, breathing and surrendering. But I'm dealing with these full blown, like when it gets to that level, there's probably no turning back. I don't know. I've never had a panic attack per se.
Yeah.
So I don't know what that really feels like. So for someone that is going through that or has, like, what are some things you would say, like, here's some things you would think about? Cause I'm assuming you want to get left of the bang, so to speak, get ahead of it before it actually happens. Right.
Yeah, I love that question. Have you ever swam in a really big lake or an ocean?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I live near Lake Michigan, and there's actually a pretty powerful riptide in Lake Michigan. And a lot of people don't know that. They're like, oh, it's a lake, it's not the ocean. And so people will be swimming, everything will seem normal. And then suddenly they hit this riptide and it's just they're sucked out. Right. And so when we're caught in a riptide, the most important thing to do is to just like let your body relax, let it pull you where it's going to pull you until it kicks you out of the riptide and then swim to shore, right?
Oh, I didn't know
Because
that.
so if you're ever caught in a riptide, don't resist it. Don't try to swim out of it. Just let it pull you where it's going to pull you. It'll kick you out of the riptide and then you swim back. Those that fight it will tire themselves out and they're just stuck in this riptide and then they drown. That's when we see that. And so oftentimes with panic attacks, we could feel like that. We just got sucked into the riptide and we're fighting it, we're fighting it, we're fighting it. And it's just getting worse and worse. And then we're worried that it's going to happen again. We get fear of the fear. Like, what if I'm driving on the highway and I have a panic attack? What if I get on a plane and I'm trapped and I have a panic attack? What if I'm, you know, doing a talk? I work with a lot of high achievers and executives, and they're like, what if I go up on stage and everyone's looking at me and I have a panic attack? That feeling like I'm sucked out into the riptide. And then
Yep.
what do I do? Yeah. So I would argue that in most cases that we were swimming a little bit before we hit the riptide, that there were changes in the current, that there were whispers. And so where we begin in that conversation is I use the metaphor in the book about the stoplight strategies. The green light is when we feel calm. For some of your listeners, maybe it's been a really long time since you've been in the green light. And if
I don't
that's
even know what green light is. I feel like I live in the yellow at least all the time.
this is such a modern issue.
Right.
It's like you were saying a moment ago, is that 20 years ago we didn't have the language. And boy, I could talk about some of the reasons we see many of us are living in the yellow. So the green is ideally where we would want to go. And that's, you feel calm in the body, relaxed in the body. This is ventral vagal. This is where you feel connected to other people. You may feel a little bit more sexually connected with your partner, maybe more creative in the flow. This is a happy, good place, right? But then as stress accumulates, stimulation accumulates, activation accumulates, we enter the pay attention zone. And this is that moment, that canary, that indicator that, ooh, we're going to go into yellow. And oftentimes, if we can start to become attuned to that pay attention zone, we can honor the body and what it's telling us, and then we don't even have to get activated. If we miss it, or if we're unable to address that, maybe it's like you're feeling good, your kids are screaming, you're like, I can handle it, they have big feelings, but then you just start noticing like, ooh, I just clenched my teeth and I'm getting kind of mad. That's your pay attention zone. Sometimes you could be like, hey, partner, you need to take this. I got to step out, get back into my green zone, and that's good. Sometimes you're alone or you're stuck in the car and you can't do anything about it, and you go into the yellow zone. The yellow zone is a little bit of autonomic arousal, it's a little bit of activation. Your heart may be pounding a little harder. Your body temperature may rise. Maybe you feel ice in your veins. Maybe you feel a racing in your thoughts. Maybe you get a little bloated in your stomach, right? The body starts to communicate. The thoughts start to change. As that intensifies, we get to, I call it the wonky zone. This is the moment before crisis. This is that shit's hitting the fan. Are we going to be able to do something about it? Or are we going into crisis here? So then this is the red light zone. Now we're in the riptide. Now we're having a panic attack, a rage attack, a pain attack, whatever this attack is, it's your flavor of crisis. And then we start the cycle again. So the treatments the ways to respond to that are going to vary depending on what stoplight zone you're in. I've had so many people call me and say, Dr. Cain, deep breathing doesn't work. Why are you telling me to breathe? And I say, well, when you're in a red light zone panic attack, breathing's probably not going to cut it. But if you can catch it when you're in the pay attention zone, it might make a difference. It's a mismatch. Just like if somebody is wanting to go and they're going to do a presentation for their job, they're going to do a podcast and they're feeling a little nervous about it, Xanax might be an overkill, right?
Yeah.
So it's all about the match. And in the book, I call these the stoplight strategies, and it walks through how to understand what it's like for you as a unique individual. And then you'll actually be able to create your own panic proof protocol, which includes all of the steps that you can take in each zone to reprogram your nervous system, to repattern your responses, but then also in those moments when you just need to be okay and not give in to panic, that you have those tools too.
Yeah. So cool. I know you have a holistic health background being an
Yeah.
ND.
Yeah.
And we were talking about serotonin earlier. And maybe a lot of people don't know this, but 90% of your serotonin is made in your gut. So that's a powerful neurotransmitter for happiness, right? So when you look at the body in this holistic view, right? Mind, body, spirit, all those things, gut health might play into that, as well as the mental and emotional, things that we need, or even EMDR, right? Something else that you do. So talk about, if someone were to come work with you personally, how do you integrate all of these modalities? And I'm sure, again, you have your own like intake form, like you're talking about the 9 different anxieties. So you can kind of tell and triage for folks, but like talk about some of these other modalities that are not just the typical cognitive behavioral therapy that people are used to, that you might implement with people.
Yeah, our symptoms are data about what needs healing and how. And gut anxiety is one of the 9 types of anxiety. And so you may be experiencing gut anxiety if when you get stressed, you notice gas, bloating, indigestion, diarrhea. I get a lot of kids who get diarrhea when they're really stressed, like before school anxiety. Kids, oh, my stomach hurts. I gotta go to the bathroom, right? So we think about that and we're like, oh, okay, we notice that the body's communicating quite a lot with the gut, and we know that the gut matters. In fact, as you said, the gut makes the majority of the serotonin that we have in our body, and the gut communicates bidirectionally to the brain, in part via the vagus nerve. And a lot of us have probably more recently heard about the vagus nerve and how the vagus nerve is almost like a switch from stressed to calm. Activating vagus nerve can reduce our blood pressure, can reduce our heart rate, can reduce our sense of stress and overwhelm. It can help us stop panic in its tracks. And we know that the gut microbiome uses the vagus nerve as one of their ways of regulating the brain and body. In fact, many of us think like, oh, my thoughts and my emotions and my cravings come from my brain, when in all reality, by and large, it comes from your gut. You think you want that piece of cake, your gut bugs want that piece of cake, right? So there's this whole new world of science, and it's looking at psychobiotics. Actually, is this something that's come across your desk yet? Not
Not
yet.
really, not really. No, not too many people have talked about it. So yeah,
Let's talk about it really
yeah,
briefly.
that'd
So,
be good.
psychobiotics. So, we used to say, okay, the gut's out of balance. We know that microbial diversity is the name in the game. More diverse bugs, the better. So, we would just give them as many strains as possible, the highest doses as possible, sort of like throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. So, like, hope for the best. But there's this great book that came out. It's called The Psychobiotic Revolution by Anderson, Cryan, and Dinan. And they talk about how they have been able to isolate specific bacteria in the human gut microbiome that are able to regulate brain health and nervous system health. Some gut bacteria make GABA, some make serotonin, some make adrenaline, some make dopamine, some help metabolize our sex hormones like estrogen and testosterone. Then these guts also regulate our hormones like cortisol. So when we have symptoms like gut anxiety, and I have a patient, they've been to the gastroenterologist, they're taking a PPI like the purple pill Prilosec, or they take a lot of Tums, or they are really constipated. I'm curious about what the heck is happening in the gut. And I start looking at maybe stool testing if it's indicated. Or I might send them to a gastroenterologist for a colonoscopy or other types of screening if that's indicated. And then we start thinking about, well, what other systems does the gut talk to? It talks to the nervous system. So, okay, what's happening with vagus nerve? The gut talks to our endocrine system. Well, what's happening with cortisol, thyroid, and our sex hormones? And so by looking at the whole person, zeroing in on the main thing of the main thing, it helps us be a little bit more strategic and precise, as opposed to I'm just going to give you an antidepressant and a really broad spectrum probiotic and hope for the best. We're actually going to figure out what might be going on that our symptoms are telling us about. We correct it, the body heals itself, and then the symptoms naturally go away and we feel a personal sense of power and freedom.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. Talk about EMDR too, for people that aren't familiar with that. I've never done it, but I have heard from friends in the industry that it's one of the most, and I had a friend actually who went through it and said, "Oh my God," he's like, "Joel, like in 1 to 3 sessions, he got just powerful results from he was a police officer, and so there was a lot of even post-traumatic stress he didn't even really recognize, and he said
Yeah.
EMDR was very, very helpful. So talk about how you can implement that, and it seems like it's a really effective tool for reversing a lot of those hardwired things that maybe, like you said, breathing's not going to get me there. Maybe something like this, we ante it up, right, with some of the tech that we can use.
Yeah, EMDR is so good at reprogramming that mind body connection so that every part of us is in the present instead of stuck in the past. So think about it like you live in Idaho where it's very cold in the winter.
Yeah.
And you adapt to that cold by putting on a coat, unless you're a high school boy, in which case you don't, because that's not cool or manly. But an adult with a prefrontal cortex will put on a coat, right?
Yeah.
And that's an adaptation that keeps us nice and safe and warm. But then let's say that you want to retire to Mexico. If you keep that coat on, that adaptation that was absolutely necessary, life-saving, and protective in one situation or scenario, that coat will create suffering and could create more issues if you keep it on in your next scenario. So that adaptation becomes maladaptive. And so, for those of you who are listening who feel like I've gone to talk therapy, I've taken the medications, I've done the functional testing, I've done the biohacking, and I feel like I'm stuck. I feel like even though logically I know it's not dangerous to get in a car, but my body doesn't believe me and I have panic attacks, EMDR may be a valuable tool. And so it stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. And this was created by Francine Shapiro in the 1980s. And she noticed that she's studying a lot of hypnosis at the time when this came to her. And she noticed that when we apply bilateral stimulation, originally she looked at eye movement, where your eyes will shift left and right while thinking of a memory. She noticed that that was pretty similar to how we process short-term into long-term memory, which is during REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep. And so she's like, oh, interesting. So if we could reproduce this in a clinical setting, maybe we could reprocess all of that stuff in a healing way so that those stuck maladaptive patterns can be unwound and repatterned, right? So they've done so much research with this. In fact, they did the majority of their research initially with combat veterans. And the research showed that over 90% of combat veterans who were diagnosed with PTSD after 3 sessions of EMDR no longer satisfied the criteria for PTSD. Their symptoms were so much better. So this has been a mainstay in treatment since the 2000s. It's become much more popularized. And the cool thing about it is if you have insurance, your insurance will probably cover it if you have behavioral health coverage. And it's very safe, very effective. And it truly helps us to begin the process of recalibrating, reprogramming. And so I've done EMDR, and that was game changing for me. I practice EMDR, I see patients, and I've seen absolutely incredible changes take place in the body and in the mind. And so with that lupus me story, to kind of go full circle,
Yeah.
is I've had patients come in who I'm remembering that story when I learn about their case, and I learn about that sense of identity, that sense of ownership. And for those people that feel stuck in identity, that feel stuck in the nocebo, that feel like they just can't get out, is EMDR can be really powerful, because sometimes the body keeps the score and the brain is just like, I don't know. And that's when I've seen EMDR really shine. So I wish that that woman would have, maybe she did later in her journey, but I wish that for her, that she could have had some EMDR.
Yeah, that's such a good one. And I don't think it's that really even that even minus insurance. A lot of these things I do for my own health never are covered by insurance.
Yeah.
But I don't think EMDR is that really that expensive anyways. And a lot of times you're seeing treatments, 3 to 10 treatments, right? I mean, is that pretty like standard? Or depending what people are working on, obviously.
Exactly. Yeah. We call it a big T trauma, like a single event, like a car accident.
Yep.
That can be a couple of treatments for a lot of people. That could be enough. And of course, it depends on the person, because if that car accident reminds them of a car accident 20 years ago with somebody they lost, and it's much more complicated, then think of it as that ball of twine is bigger. It'll take more time to unravel. And little T traumas, for a lot of people, that could be years. So that could be little T traumas, maybe like I grew up with very difficult caretaker, or I dealt with neglect, or I was a part of a religious trauma, or all
Hmm.
things that are very long term. But EMDR works, and it is a process, and the more you stick with it, the more you'll see it should be an uphill climb of improvement.
I love that. I'm looking at the time. I know we're going to wrap things up here in a little bit, but I wanted to ask you about kids because I have 2 kids. Do you have kids as well, Dr. Kane?
I have a four-legged kid. She's a cavapoo.
Okay. So that technically is a kid. But I was just curious because one of the big things, raising kids is you can tell them as much as you want, you can praise them, but really a lot of the learning comes in when you're modeling the change and like who you are. And I'm sure there's a lot of parents that are listening that they either have anxiety or maybe they don't, but maybe, we don't want to pass on some of the things that we learned that maybe were not the best and that could later affect our kids. So in terms of like modeling that the way, right? What would be just in terms of, I don't want my kids to grow up with massive anxiety or panic attacks. What any suggestions that you would say for parents out there? Obviously they need to model the way, but like what would be some things that, or maybe conversations I should be having at an earlier age and saying, oh yeah, I'm feeling anxious before this game or something. Right. Cause that's natural, right? I've had those conversations with my kid and he said, yeah, I feel like, sick to my stomach, things like you were talking about. So what are some of the things that we should be doing to kind of tell our kids like, hey, that's normal. This is what you're feeling. And here's something you can do, or, you know,
Yeah. So many of our kids, they come out of high school and they know the Pythagorean theorem, but they don't know what anxiety is. So I think that we have an opportunity as parents, as healers, is to start by helping them understand their bodies. Like, oh, tell me what you're feeling in your tummy right now. Oh, I notice you're holding your tummy. Can you talk about it? And they make these wonderful decks that you can get, and it has like pictures, and it has facial expressions and feeling words and sensation words, because the more that the kid understands, like, oh, I'm feeling a little worry in my tummy, and I know that that's normal, and it's okay to feel worry in my tummy, and I know that it will pass, and I know what I can do to feel a little better. And then, as parents, as you said, modeling that is, maybe your kid will notice that you just got really irritated and you kind of snapped at them. And they can notice you take a breath, just a minute. Daddy's feeling just a little bit of stress in his chest. So he's just going to take a breath. And I know it's going to be okay. And I'm sorry that that I snapped at you, but reflecting and helping them cultivate that emotional intelligence and that body intelligence. And then the very last thing that I want to mention for parents that are listening is teach them havening. I just talked to a mom this morning, and she told me that she's found that havening is the most effective thing she's ever used for stress. And all of her kids, she has 5 kids from second grade up to high school, they're all doing havening. And she's like, my household is new. So may I tell you
Please,
really
I know
briefly?
nothing about havening, so I'm excited. Yeah.
I'll do this in 2 minutes and then we can wrap. So havening used to be called amygdala deamplification. The amygdala is the big feeling part of the brain. And when that gets amplified, everything feels bigger, more fear, more anger, more sad, all of the things. So what we want to do is we want to start reprogramming that so that we have a sense of control. When our amygdala gets really loud, biologically, we haven't evolved to analyze why we're afraid. When the tiger's coming, you don't want to have an existential conquest about it. You just want to get away from the tiger. So we want to start reprogramming our triggers. So what you do is you notice the yucky feeling, and maybe you notice that yucky feeling for 10 to 20 seconds. You feel it, you think about it, you acknowledge it, you notice it. And then you're going to go into creating a road to the logical brain. Here's how you create the road to the logical brain is you're going to combine touch, which we use in EMDR, the left and the right touch. So for those who are listening, I'm taking the palms of my hands and it's almost like I'm dusting the dirt off the palms of my hands, left and right. So you're going to use touch and you're going to combine that with logic activation because the logical brain, we got to create a road there. So what you might do with your kids, what you might even model is let's say our ABCs out loud. And then you might say, well, let's count backwards from 40 to 0 by twos. And then you might ask them, what are all of the Major League Baseball teams? And so you spend about 4 minutes with the touch and the logic. And then you go back to the yucky feeling. And you repeat this process of alternating back and forth until the yucky feeling feels not yucky anymore. And maybe you replace that yucky feeling with something positive. And I guarantee that if you practice this every day with your kids, pick something yucky from today, that will start to help them feel a greater sense of power and it will become more automatic in their lives.
That is so good. I love that. I've never even heard of that. So thanks for dropping that gem at the very
Yes.
end here. This is so good. Dr. Cain, so much good stuff. The book is amazing. I feel like I'll have to have you on for a round 2 because I feel like I talked to you forever. Where can people though connect with you, learn more about all the amazing things that you're doing? Are you on Instagram? Are you on LinkedIn? Where are you most active? And then also if people want to work, do you work? I'm assuming you work with people telehealth too, right?
I'm not taking on new clients right now, but I do a lot of teaching inside of my courses. And so if you want to learn more, I'm on Instagram at Dr. Nicole Cain, DrNicole, and then Cain. And so come find me on Instagram if you want to get in a course. I do coaching in there. And I also have a website, Dr.
So
Nicole Cain.
within the course, people can do coaching though. You like do group coaching.
Yeah, I do group.
Okay. Amazing. That's what I was wondering. Okay. Perfect.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, it's so good. And I'm really excited to answer every question that I can.
That is amazing. Dr. Nicole Cain, thanks for being on the show. Appreciate you so much. We'll have to have you
Thank you.
back on.
Thanks, Joel. See you soon.